Welcome to all the participants of this today's webinar.
Recording in progress.
On Startup Trilogy, and in the mission of that one is particularly our self-reliant India. In that particular mission, what about this Startup Trilogy? This MSME, this startup webinar is all about, and we have the faculty for the today's webinar, CA Isang M. Sa. And CA Isang is an experienced head with the demonstration history of working in the financial services and startup industry, skilled in venture capital, valuation, corporate finance, and income tax with the master degree focused in investment and portfolio management from that one is CFA Institute, as well as Isang practice diverse areas of due diligence, valuations, transaction structuring, and support. He advises India leading seed angel networks, venture capital firms, incubator and corporates, and has executed numerous transactions in early stage companies, startups, and mature companies. Isang is an expert in the startup ecosystem and has been instrumental in developing Indian startup ecosystem across the multiple ways of liaising closely with the government and top ecosystem players. Isang has mentored and worked with over 100 plus startups and has consulted angel investors, which include some of the top 10 investors in India, and is closely working with the top institutional investors. Isang also engages and advises startup on raising equity and debt capital from the investors, implementing ESOPs, and obtaining tax and regulatory benefits available for startups. In addition, Isang advises clients in domains which include e-commerce, blockchain, cryptocurrency, and FMCG on financial, tax, and regulatory matters. Isang is right now that one is he has the regular speaker in that one is ICA certificate course on startup, as well as in other platform of startup. With this, we welcome CA Isang Sa in this webinar. With this, I am handing over the session to Isang.
Thank you, Dr. Sambit, and good evening to all our participants. I think a great initiative again by the Institute that we are leading another session here that is focused towards professionals and working with startups. I would like to also thank the Institute for the opportunity, and hopefully today's session will be something that will be able to give value to all our participants who are present. So I think the session's title is Startup India Trilogy, and I would request that in terms of understanding what this trilogy means, there are three aspects or three pillars to the Startup India ecosystem, and how that is benefiting startups, and how we as professionals can work towards enabling startups to get these benefits for them. Yes. So I would, while I don't want this to be a monologue, I would request all our participants to share some things that they have in the chat or the questions in the Q&A box. I think we are on meeting mode.
So chat mode is not applicable over here. The questions will come up. Then I'll answer. I'll just put up the question before you.
Okay, fine. No problem. I'll be happy to take questions as they come, sir, so that at least we can keep it a little bit interactive while this is going to be a 2-hour session. So friends, just to give a background, because the ecosystem is now vibrant. Obviously, with the pandemic, things were a little here or there, but it's back to becoming vibrant, and the number of startups that are coming, growing, scaling in India, all are now at a different level altogether. So we are almost 60,000 plus startups today, more than $60 billion in investment by 2020 and 21. It's only increased further. Unicorn, which is a term utilized for startups with more than US $1 billion valuation. This number has also grown beyond 36, I would say now this is 50 plus in terms of the number of unicorn startups, unicorn being the term used to have startups with valuations of more than $1 billion US. And I'll also try during this session to also share some more terminologies used in the ecosystem, to just understand terms and nuances better. India is third largest, only after China and US being the other two economies in front of us in terms of number of startups, the activity in the ecosystem. Tech incubators or accelerators, there are 500 plus incubators, accelerators. These are ecosystem participants who help these startups early in their life cycle and enable them to grow, scale, or get market access or investment for their businesses. DPIIT is the government body that is driving the Startup India initiative, the Startup India, the Stand Up India initiative. And the startupindia.gov.in is a website that I think all of us should visit to know more about startups. It's an extremely user interface friendly website, very resourceful, a lot of information available, and a lot of announcements and schemes that the government makes for startups. They're all hosted here. So just a quick glance, 2021 was a year of a lot of activity, number of companies that became unicorns, the number of companies that are soonicorns. Soonicorns are companies that will soon become unicorns. So that's another terminology that is just being used. A number of startups that have merged, that have got headlines, that have now started marketing themselves on some of our most common and viewed platforms, say IPL, or for that matter any other public platforms that they've been using to market their products or services. Economic recovery is just about which phases we expect for startups to be catching up and doing better, and those that will definitely catch up in time to come. So that's just an overview. The plan for the evening today, this is evening, not morning, is to share about the trilogy in detail, about how as professionals we can enable startups to get this, and how are the benefits for these being given to the startups. So that's on the trilogy piece. A little bit upon the structure as to how startups are usually set up, because that's a common question that comes to us as professionals. And what is the journey of an entity, and how as professionals we can collaborate or grow with those startups in the journey. So 2016, I would say, is the day or the year within which the dynamics of the ecosystem changed to a great extent. The Prime Minister announced the Startup India, Stand Up India initiative from the White Fort, and there began an entire conceptualization of what is the definition of a startup from an India legal perspective. So the notification by the DPIIT prescribes the startup to be an entity which is not more than 10 years since the date of its incorporation, or has a turnover not exceeding 100 crores in the preceding financial years. So this definition underwent change from time to time. It began with a 5-year, went up to 7 years, and turnover began with 25 crores and went up to 100 crores. So as it stands today, an entity with not more than 10 years post incorporation and turnover not exceeding 100 crores in any preceding financial year. That became the definition for startups, and therefore the underlying set of regulations that followed for startups, which are today there in India. So I'll come straight to the trilogy. The trilogy has 3 elements, each of which we are going to go into greater detail. But just at an overview level, the first that you see on the right top is the DPIIT recognition as an eligible startup. So the DPIIT, being the government body, has a process for recognizing startups. And via that process, they would give to startups what is called an eligible startup status. And that would become the determining criteria for getting the benefits under the Startup India program. So only those startups that have been recognized by the DPIIT as eligible startups, so that became the terminology, are the startups that are extended the benefits of the various policies and programs. The second pillar, I would say, in the trilogy is the angel tax exemption. Now, this angel tax exemption was largely for startups that were raising capital from investors. Capital raises were at high valuations or substantially high valuations, and the way the arithmetics of determining the price and the premium per share, etc., resulted in these companies having a high amount of securities premium. We as chartered accountants understand these nuances a little better. So the securities premium element in these companies was high, and that premium was subject or sought to be taxed by the tax authorities, and therefore was a hue and cry about why such premium was not subject to tax by the startup. So there became a mechanism now to give angel tax exemption to startups. This exemption, however, is not unlimited. It is a limit of up to 25 crore of capital raised. We'll cover that in detail as well. The third pillar is the ATIAC, the Interministerial Board exemption. So this is to give deduction with respect to paying tax on profits for a consecutive period of 3 years out of a total period of 10 years. So you have a choice to choose 3 out of 10 years consecutively where you would not have to pay any tax on your profits. As a startup, that would get the Interministerial Board exemption. The important part to note is that these three are independent pillars. The first one requires an application to be made to get the eligible startup recognition. The second one needs a separate application to be made to get the angel tax exemption. The third also is a separate application to get the Interministerial Board exemption. It is not that getting one is equivalent to getting two or the other two benefits. Each of these are separate, independent, individual applications. So I think that's the most important piece for us to drive when communicating to startups. The common misconception is that because I'm an eligible startup recognized by DPIIT, I have got angel tax exemption. I don't have to pay tax on profits for 3 out of 10 years. That is not the case. You need those separate recognitions as well. Applications and the separate recognitions. So with that construct being the three pillars, I would be going now next into deliberating on each one of them as to how we get them, what are the nuances about those, and then how are they useful to the startups. So the first one is the Startup India recognition, the recognition of quote unquote, what I've put here as eligible startups, right? So the government under its flagship program introduced this concept of an eligible startup. On the right, you see this is a startup that is not more than 10 years. It's in corporation, turnover not exceeding 100 crores in any preceding financial year. And the third being a qualitative criteria where the startup has to demonstrate that it is in any way contributing towards employment creation or wealth, employment generation or wealth creation. So third one is more qualitative. First two are very precise in terms of the criteria that an entity needs to fulfill. Now, what types of companies or entities, so to speak, can be eligible startups? So on the left, you will see at the bottom, there are three types: a private limited company, a limited liability partnership, a registered firm, or even for that matter, the fourth, which is a one-person company, can also be an eligible startup. That has also been clarified by an FAQ by the DPIIT. So 4 types of entity structures that are eligible to become an eligible startup. If, however, this startup is formed via some sort of business reorganization or some form of corporate restructuring, then such an entity would not be considered as a startup. They're looking only for companies which are different or unique and have a business proposition that is that for which the business has been set up, and for those companies they would be granting the startup recognition. A common question that is also asked or that is asked is whether a subsidiary of a holding company would also be an eligible startup. So again, there the response is no. Subsidiaries do not qualify to be eligible startups because their presumption is that they are a part of a corporate business reorganization or a corporate structure sort of entity. So that's the overarching criteria to be eligible in the first place to approach the DPIIT to get recognized as an eligible startup. Let's say you fulfill that. So what's happening is there's a founder. Let's take a real case kind of study and approach this. Is a founder who set up his business. Let's say that's in the e-commerce space. Would a company be eligible to get that recognition? Yes. Is there any kind of restriction with regard to the type of companies that can get this recognition? The answer is no. There is no such restriction. You can be an FMCG company, an e-commerce company, a technology company, a service provider company, a SaaS company. You can be absolutely anything. There is no restriction on any type of business that is entitled to get the startup recognition. The principal criteria of 100 crore and 10 years is what you have to fulfill. So you'll have to register on the startupindia.gov.in website as a founder, apply for recognition as an eligible startup, provide a certain information about your startup by way of their questionnaire. And I'll even go into what that questionnaire is and what kind of details are asked for and some common things to take care of. Submit this particular application online with two important documents. First, the incorporation certificate of the company, and secondly, the pitch deck. A pitch deck, again, is a word used in the ecosystem that largely reflects the presentation of that company, or the deck of the company, or the investment memorandum of the company. Basically, it's a communication of what that startup does, who the people are, what's the problem it's solving, how does it intend to earn revenue, and what's its business forecast look like. So those are the two important documents that go with your application. There's a 15-day period to process your application. If there are any questions from the DPIIT, they would ask you. It's a user-friendly, again, process online fully, no government costs involved. And within 15 days, you would get in your inbox a DPIIT startup recognition certificate if all responses are satisfactory. So in 15 days, your company would be recognized as an eligible startup and would be entitled to move to the next set of benefits that it can get under the government programs. Now, specifically with respect to the process of undergoing this recognition, there are a set of 14 to 15 plus questions and some more documents needed. Largely, their questions are in terms of what is the product or service that is being offered, what a brief note about the business and about what it does, mobile numbers and email ID or contact details of the director. So you may even get calls for verification. Certificates of incorporation of the company. What is the problem that you're solving? How do you propose to solve the problem? What is unique? How do you generate revenue? And some form of social content in the form of a website, or in the form of a domain, or in the form of some sort of public release or press writings about your business. So that's a bit about what they're looking for in terms of the information from you as a founder that is applying for getting startup recognition. And obviously, a lot of founders may not be well versed with this process, and that's where we as professionals come in to enable them to get the application done and get the DPIIT recognition for them. So there's intellectual property questions. There are stage of startup questions. So you have an ideation stage, a validation stage, a traction stage, and a scaling stage, right? These are, again, terminologies in the ecosystem. As you start interacting a lot with these companies, you would become familiar with what some of these terminologies mean within the ecosystem. All right. So this is the screenshot that I just wanted to share in terms of what the process is. So just to summarize, part one is to apply for startup recognition and you need to fall within the criteria. Any sort of entity structure is fine. You cannot be a subsidiary or business reorganization output. Application is fully online, no costs, and you have a 15-day period to get the application approved and a certificate to land in your inbox. So that's, friends, the first pillar to the trilogy. The second pillar is the angel tax exemption. So as I was just summarizing the three pillars, the second one being the one where startups were pursued from a perspective of tax being levied with respect to the rounds of capital they had raised. And more particularly, there was a premium element involved in issuing their shares, and such premium was what was subject matter to tax. So this got a lot of unwanted attention, and hence the startups called for getting a certain exemption with respect to such tax measures being taken by the government. And hence there is a process to get angel tax exemption. So this angel tax exemption, first of all, is available as an option only to eligible startups. So your first pillar must have been completed for you to come to this second pillar. So it's in that way a cycle to complete, where the first, being an eligible startup recognition, has to be completed and received, and then you could go ahead and apply for an angel tax exemption. The process is again fully online. There is a declaration to furnish in Form 2. A format of that I have shared here is also publicly available. Once you provided that self-declaration, which is self-certified by the director or founders of the company, and you would upload that online within a period of, again, 15 odd days, you should be receiving a letter from the income tax stating that the angel tax exemption or exemption from 56 to 7B of the income tax has been given. So 56 to 7B is the section in the income tax that provides for levying a tax where shares have been issued for a price which is greater than their fair value. And income tax authorities questioned the fair value of the startups, saying that these were companies that were too early to command such a fair value. But fair value were always a commercial negotiation between the investor and founders, and hence there was this disparity between the two thought processes. So that kind of protection has now come in the form of getting an angel tax exemption for an eligible startup. But this exemption is not available to everybody. It is available to all startups. It is not available for an unlimited amount. There is a cap with respect to the amount that is exempt with respect to angel tax, which is up to 25 crores. That does not mean that anything above 25 crores will also be subject to tax. That's not the case. If it is more than 25 crores, the section provides that you have to have also obtained a valuation report from a merchant banker under the discounted cash flow method with respect to issuance of shares, which the startup is doing in order to get capital. So if there is a valuation report that substantiates the value of the company, the assessing officer is bound to take that report on record and appreciate the fair value of that company. If he has any counter arguments, the same could be understood. But that is a story beyond the 25 crore limit. Up to 25 crore, however, they have provided the entire exemption benefit, saying that that need not get questioned with respect to whether there is any element of tax involved. So the 25 crore aggregation is now is what is applicable for angel investments. However, in determining this 25 crore limit, the following investments would be excluded. So these amounts, even if they come, they're not computed in the 25 crore limit, nor are they subject to tax under 56 to 7B. So firstly, if there's an investment from a non-resident, it is not subject to the 25 crore limit, nor is it subject to taxation as an angel tax. Secondly, from a venture capital SEBI registered fund, category 1, 2, or 3 alternate investment funds. And third, a specified company, that is a company whose net worth is exceeding rupees 100 crore, or as a turnover which exceeds more than 250 crores in the preceding year. So if it's that kind of a company that is investing in your business, not computed in the 25 crore limit. If it's a VC firm, not included. If it's non-resident investors, not included. If therefore, by default, these are largely resident individuals or resident entities who are investing in your startup up to 25 crore limit, there will not be an issue of the investment being subject to tax. In terms of a practical process now to achieve the angel tax exemption, that is where again we as professionals can get involved to help the entrepreneurs and the business obtain the angel tax exemption. So like I said, the process is firstly dependent on you getting the first eligible startup recognition. So that's step 1. First, fulfill pillar 1. Then there's a self-declaration. We'll fill that up and host it online. There's a director's DSC that needs to be affixed, and then there is an email from the department that has to come through. So the process therefore is straightforward and fairly simple. Another very important element with respect to claiming or enjoying the angel tax exemption is the end use restriction of the amount that has been raised. So again, just to take one step back, the investment that we have raised and the premium thereon has been exempted from any sort of tax scrutiny. Therefore, they have put certain end use restrictions that the amount so raised should not be utilized with so and so purposes. Their objective being that the money raised should have been used for business purposes, should not have been used for other than business purposes. All right. So the first, and on the left here, you see the larger buckets for which the money should not be used, which is, for example, purchasing a land or building a residential property. Second, building using it for the purpose of rent property in using it as a purpose for renting it in the ordinary course of business. Third, using it to give loans and advances. Fourthly, using it for making capital contribution to other entities or other businesses. Investing or purchasing motor vehicles, aircrafts, yachts in excess of 10 lakhs, jewelry, archaeological collections, drawing, painting, sculptures, scriptures, bullions. This is the negative list. The startup cannot use the money raised and claimed for as angel tax exemption towards using it for these purposes. Now, all of these restrictions are where they are outside the ordinary course of business. If, for example, lending is the business of the startup, then the money can be used to lend because that is in the ordinary course of business. If purchasing and selling motor vehicles, aircrafts, yachts is ordinary course of business, it can be used. If purchasing, selling residential property is the ordinary course of business for the startup, then it can be used there. So the premise being that the money has to be used for the purpose of business, and if one of these happen to be purposes of that startup, then it's fine. Otherwise, the funds cannot be utilized for these specific purposes. So that's the end use restriction, an important thing to be adhered to when finally claiming the exemption. A common or a practical FAQ comes in the form of having treasury management for the money that has been raised. So if I am a startup that has raised 5 crores of capital and I happen to invest 3 crores in a liquid fund or in a treasury, investment instrument of sorts, then whether that will result in voiding the conditions for angel tax exemption. So practically there isn't any governing literature for this. But again, the overarching intention was to use the money for business purpose. While it is in treasury, it is not that it is being invested elsewhere and not being used for business. It is only a better management of capital. So we take a view that that's something that can be permissible because it is just treasury management. It is just optimum use of money. Eventually, the money comes back to the business and is actually utilized for its core business purpose. So I think with that being the understanding of the intent of the legislature, we take a practical view of managing of treasury management of capital which has been raised by the entity. Yeah, so this is the annexure, which is the eligible startup declaration that is requested for to be provided in order to claim the angel tax exemption. So it's a standard letter about details of the individual or the director of the company, their PAN number, the startup's DPID recognition number, and that they have understood the terms of the notification which has been issued by the government, and that they will be abiding by the same. So place, signature, designation, date, name are the standard other details that need to be provided. So this is a declaration to that effect. Okay. The third pillar is the interministerial board recognition. Before I just go a little bit more in detail on the third aspect, the first and two, just to summarize again, are the eligible startup recognition and then the angel tax bit. If there are any questions still here, sir, are we taking questions, Dr. Sambit, in the chat, or we want to take them all towards the end? How do we want to do it? I think if we take some more questions as we go, then that will be useful.
And at last, we will take up the questions.
Okay, sir. All right. Okay. The third one, therefore, is the interministerial board recognition. This is the third pillar. I think this is also the most sought after benefit because you don't have to pay tax for 3 out of 10 years, right? And you will have a lot of startups who may be not guided correctly, coming and asking you that how do we get this and how do we not pay tax on 3 out of 10 years profits. So here's where we will have to be most prompt about in terms of being able to educate them on what this particularly means. So the interministerial board recognition gives 3 out of 10 years deduction in respect of payment of profits. the startups have to be incorporated after 1/4/2016 and before 1/4/2022. So any startups, even though they may be a startup because they have been incorporated in 2013, for example, they're less than 10 years since incorporation. However, they will not get the third benefit. They will only get the first two benefits. So for this, the startup has to have been incorporated after 1/4/16. That's the first layer of qualifying. Additionally, for the startup to get the interministerial board recognition, the application to get this is fully online. The approval received from an interministerial board. This board has 3 members that you see on the bottom right. The biotechnology, the science and technology department, and the DPIIT department being the 3 members to this board. The board's minutes are made public. They're published online. Usually have monthly meetings in order to shortlist applications and grant approvals as they may deem fit. There's a technical agency that is appointed by the interministerial board that also filters some of these applications which have come into the department's process. So that's the overall structure and manner in which the interministerial board is operating. Now, because this benefit results in no revenue to the exchequer in the form of getting deduction on profits. However, there is a minimum alternate tax that is payable nevertheless by the startups. But because there is no tax to be paid on profits, the number of companies that have got this benefit are very, very, very few. Therefore, the number of recognitions granted are also very few. To give some number to this, actually, that number is only 394 startups. So 394 startups just as of last month, and the number of startups that have got this benefit out of a total pool of almost 55,000 startups that have applied and got the DPIIT recognition. So on 55,000, you have a 394, which is less than 1% of companies that have got the interministerial board recognition. The number of startups that have obviously got DPIIT recognition up to last month, 55,000. Therefore, there are many, many more here in India that have not yet taken this recognition and taken the benefits of this recognition. Therefore, there's a gap to fill there. And there are an equally high number of startups that have raised capital but may not have taken the angel tax exemption benefit as well, which would help them in their tax proceeding processes. So both of these are gaps which need to be filled. Professionals can educate, involve, and enable these to happen. And that's where we see first set of engagement coming in usually with startups, and it's an entry point to maybe interacting with founders and being part of their business. So that's a bit about the process. The process is fully online. The documents needed are the memorandum of associations of the company, 3-year financials and historical tax returns. If the company is less than 3 years since incorporation, the lower period is fine. Pitch deck, a video or link explaining the product or service that the startup is engaged into, and any other specific information that the DPIIT would require. So this is the data points that are needed in order to make the application for the interministerial board recognition. One more element to clarify here is that the interministerial board recognition, or what is called the 80 IAC startups. So this section is called the 80 IAC section, again under the Income Tax Act. It is these startups that also enjoy further tax benefits, which I will also be covering in a bit. But these benefits that you will commonly hear are about capital gain exemptions, ESOP tax deferments, set off and carry forward of losses. So these specific tax benefits, which are over and above the first two and the other pillars, are available only to 80 IAC registered startups and not to anybody else. All right. So that's a summary of the first 3 pillars to the recognition. The angel tax had its benefits. The IAC had its benefits. What does the first pillar of recognition give you benefits, which is the simple recognition as an eligible startup? So that's something that I'm covering next. Just sorry, give me a minute. Sorry. So this benefit of eligible startups coming out from the first pillar is available to all startups. So here's where the startup recognition benefit starts coming. Firstly, if you are under the Companies Act, if you are a company and you are an eligible startup, just the first pillar, the second and third pillar had their own benefits. Those were all separate. You are exempted from preparing cash flow statements. You can do with 2 board meetings in a year versus 4, which normally a company needs. You can accept deposits from members or loans from members above the permitted threshold for normal companies. Fourthly, you can issue what is called a convertible note to your investors. And I will even spend a couple of minutes on what is a convertible note, because that is an instrument unique to startups and the ecosystem. Fifth, you can issue sweat equity shares or ESOPs to founders of the company, and ESOPs can also be issued to founder directors of the company, which otherwise normal private limited companies are not allowed to do. So you have an exception in the form of getting stock options also in the company. Certifications from practicing CSS are done away with, so you don't need to go and get any extensive certifications done for your annual filings and forms. So this is the benefits available to an eligible startup. Second, they can issue optionally convertible notes under the FEMA regulations. Sorry, this is under the company law regulations. Now, under the FEMA regulations, startups which are eligible startups can issue optionally convertible notes. They can they can take loans, in the form of ECB from overseas and have relaxed regulations and end-use restrictions. And thirdly, they can even open foreign bank accounts very easily. In doing this, the convertible note, which is the first element that I was referring to, is something that is unique to the ecosystem and startups. So the company law has introduced a new instrument in the form of convertible note. The convertible note is an instrument that allows a startup to take money as a loan with an option to convert it into equity or an option to refund the money back in case things don't work out. These convertible notes have to be in a minimum investment of 25 lakhs in a single tranche from a single person. So that's the basic requirement. And as long as they are fulfilling this condition, they can issue a convertible note to a resident shareholder or even to a non-resident investor or a resident investor, and enjoy the flexibility of having capital and either converting it to equity or refunding it back without the need for any extensive compliances which were otherwise required in any other private limited company that is not an eligible startup. So that's the true benefit of being a startup and getting a convertible note instrument as an eligible instrument to issue. The third element is on labor laws and environmental laws. So there are a set of labor laws which can be self-certified, and therefore the compliance can be based on self-certification. There are a set of environmental laws which also can be self-certified. The next is around the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the SEBI guidelines, as well as the RBI guidelines. So there is a process to fast track winding up of startups within a period of 90 days. If things don't work out well under the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. SEBI has permitted companies to issue shares with differential voting rights, so that's also permitted for startups. And thirdly, the funds, which is the SEBI regulated angel funds or alternate investment fund vehicles, they can invest into startups, particularly the angel funds can invest into startups that only have DPIIT recognition. So these are the prerequisites to words investing into into startups and the benefits the startups enjoy by virtue of being DPIIT recognized or being an eligible startup. The next one is a set of benefits again coming around in the intellectual property side. So they can apply for intellectual property in the form of trademarks or patents. Trademarks costs are subsidized by 50%, and patent costs are almost subsidized by 80%. The next is public procurement norms. So they have an opportunity to list on the government marketplace portal GEM. They do not have to pay the earnest money deposit, a minimum deposit, which usually companies need to pay in order to participate in a tender. That's exempt for startups. Minimum experience or prior turnover criteria are also exempt for startups. So they can participate in government projects, programs, tenders, and not carry the need for prior experience, turnover, or minimum deposits. The seventh one on tax, I'm going to specifically cover again in a little bit more detail. The eighth one is particularly related to dedicated cells which have been set up for startups. These are usually responsive as well. So if there are any issues, you could write to them seeking some sort of clarification or help if your client happens to be a startup that is kind of facing difficulty from a tax or regulatory perspective. Right. On the tax side, friends, I'm going to cover this separately because there is a little difference in terms of how we again understand what are the startups that are entitled to these benefits. So the first part is to all startups which are eligible startups. So they have the entire DPIIT recognition. Now, in terms of tax, the benefits are again limited to startups that have the interministerial board recognition, the third pillar, which was the ATISC or the interministerial board recognition. So firstly, there is a provision for deferring tax on ESOPs. Usually ESOPs are being taxed on exercise of the stock options by the employee. And in practical situations, it has been observed that the employees don't have a liquidity event in hand where they're able to exercise the stock and sell, but they are required to pay tax because they just have exercised the stock option and have a desire to own the stock. So because there is a tax at an event which is otherwise illiquid, they've provided for deferral of the tax by a period of 5 years or at the time of sale of stock by the employee, or if the employee leaves the company, whichever is earlier. This is only benefit that is available to ATISC companies. Angel tax bit we covered. That's a separate pillar, a separate application. Once that is done, your eligible startup is entitled to angel tax exemption. Third is on capital gains tax. So any capital gains arising on account of sale of a residential property, if that is invested in an ATISC eligible startup, then there would be capital gains exemption with respect to the amount invested. There is also a section that has been that is in place in terms of investment in units of any particular funds. However, list of such funds is not yet notified. So that is something that is still not in place. But whenever that list of funds are notified, even capital gains when exempted into units of those funds will enjoy tax benefits. In terms of set off and carry forward of losses, the current tax provisions provide that if there is a change in the ownership of the company, that is by more than 51%, a change in shareholding, then any losses that were previously carried forward in the business will be lost. So those losses cannot be carried forward. They're not subject to carry forward and set off in the future years. However, if a startup is ATISC recognized startup, then the benefit is extended in the sense that even if the shareholding changes by more than 51% and shareholders who were shareholders previously continue to be shareholders in the year of setting off of the losses, then such set off and carry forward of loss, even though the shareholding has changed by more than 51%, shall be allowed. This is also again only available for ATISC startups. And the last one we already discovered, which is the interministerial board recognition. There again, it is 3 out of 10 years, no tax on profits, but minimum alternate tax payable, and the startup can enjoy the benefit of that tax deduction. So ATISC, set off and carry forward of losses, capital gains, and ESOP tax deferment. These are benefits only if it's an ATISC startup, which today, friends, is also the 394 companies that have the benefit. So the use of this universe of benefits has got limited. Representations have been made in order to increase the number of companies to whom the interministerial board recognition is being given to. So there's work in progress happening there, but right now it's just that 394, 400 odd startups that have these extended benefits. The other ones are regularly available. These, which we all discussed, were benefits available to all startups. Right. So just to summarize, I think we have spent now almost 45 to 50 to 60 minutes. So I just want to run through, before we go to the next set of things, 3 pillars. The first pillar, the bare minimum eligible startup recognition. Second, angel tax. Third, the interministerial board recognition. In terms of numbers, the number of startups that have this today, the first pillar 54,000. The second one, this number is 1,600, but this number would have substantially increased by then from now, but still there's a gap. The third is 400 odd startups that have the interministerial board recognition. So those are the numbers and the opportunity available to get more companies onboarded here, get them educated and come here. In terms of the summary of benefits, we understood that if it's an eligible startup, it has angel tax and it has 80 ISC, then it has all benefits. It has the regulatory benefits under corporate law, FEMA, IPR, tax, all of it, right? So it's the best place to be in. Nevertheless, if it's a company that has the angel tax exemption as well as the interministerial board recognition, then you have those two benefits. And if it's a company that has only eligible startup recognition, then you will be in a position to get only the eligible startup benefits, by not get the angel tax or the TIC benefits. So I think that's just to put together that, having all three is the most desirable, but maybe the third one, because of its limited grant, is not so easily available, but there are benefits of the first and two, which should not be kind of looked over or looked at differently. All applications from the government side have no costs. They're all costs. On the government side, there are no costs for any of these applications or processes. Right. So again, because of the construct of benefits, the need of startups, comes a common question which we as professionals are usually asked, which is that if I have a startup, what should be the structure or the entity structure of my startup? So should I set this up as a private limited, an LLP, or another firm? It's again a common trilogy of the kind of options available for you to set up your business. And here again, what we have tried to do is to summarize the benefits available to startups, and therefore the entity structure under which they should fall in order to maximize the benefits. In this, at the bottom, you see something in yellow, which is investment solicitation. And there, I would like to cover that first, being the one that overrides any of the other benefits. The reason being that if you're a startup that is looking to raise capital, if in the near term, then a private limited company structure is the one that is most suitable and optimum for you. The reason for this is that the investors today invest only in companies that have a private limited structure, primarily because of some of the contractual rights or legal rights and the legal protection that they want in order for the investment that they're making, So therefore, they are, their thought processes are involved in investing in private limited companies. They also get shares or equity in the private limited company, which is reflective of their ownership, and they are construed as a shareholder or an investor in the company. So if investment solicitation is something that is to be pursued, then the preferred structure is a private limited entity structure. Other than that, if you are a company that doesn't look at raising capital as needed, and it's a business that is self-reliant, then there is no need to set up a private limited. You could very well do with LLP. They are compliance light as entities, and therefore will be beneficial to the founders or the people who are running the business. It is not necessary that all startups need to raise capital. Today, you have a startup in the form of Zerodha, one of the leading guys in the financial services brokerage industry, and they have never raised capital from external investors before. So they were actually a firm for quite some time, a partnership firm of sorts, before they migrated eventually to a private limited corporate structure. But nevertheless, the point being that you could have your startup set up even as an LLP or a partnership firm. You need not necessarily restrict it to be a forced private limited company unless you have a reason to do so. Investment solicitation is by default the top reason you should do it. Other than that, you could evaluate other options. From a tax point of view, obviously, again, we are well versed. In the firms have a 30% flat tax rate, companies 22 and 15%, and a dividend distribution, dividend tax on receipts for distribution by the company. Other than that, the other provisions of the benefits of tax laws which have been given to startups where they are related to equity structures, for example, capital gain. or set off and carry forward losses in case of change in shareholding. These again are applicable only if the structure is that of a private limited, because only then there are shares. Otherwise, these benefits really are not needed and not there. Nor are they applicable if there are firms or limited liability partnership as structures. So that's on the benefit. I mean, on the side of the various types of structures that can be done. Now coming to, I would say, the more interesting slide that I think we like to discover and be part of. And this is a slide primarily on the journey of startups. How is it that as professionals we can work with them, and in what capacity at each stage? What are some of the terms that usually are part of this ecosystem? Because capital raising is something that catches headlines. So what's in it for us as professionals? That's the purpose that is being driven here. So the first is the startup sets up. It's set up. You can help them incorporate a company, work with peer professionals, company secretaries, or lawyers. It is much needed that we come together as a professional solution to the startup with different peers of ours that we can work with. Startups usually don't have the bandwidth to coordinate with too many people. For them, capital and time are some of their most limited resources. So they're looking to have someone who can help them do everything end to end. So I think incorporation setup, where there is an ideation by the founders, there may be some agreements between the founders. So you tend to have common founder agreements between all of you. The second is between all of the founders. The second is friends and family round, or what is called the pre-seed equity round or the seed equity round. So this word seed, primarily just a terminology to indicate that the business is very new. It's just an example of how plants are at the seed stage and then they grow bigger. So that's the terminology, pre-seed equity or seed equity, and usually between friends and family who look to invest in the founder's business. So the investment instruments here are largely equity shares. There are loans given by some of these family members or founders. Or thirdly, a convertible note instrument is used to invest. Again, the logic to this was the same as before. Convertible note is an instrument that allowed an investor to invest money with an obligation to either having repaid or having converted. So the flexibility is very good, and that's therefore maybe a favored instrument to use. The idea or prototype or proof of concept, POC, is the stage of the business. So a proof of concept or POC is the stage where they are testing their product and seeing whether there is any market for that product, whether there are any customers for the product, whether there is any use for the product, so or service for that matter. So it's a discovery stage for the particular company. The third is wherein incubators, accelerators, mentors, and angel investors. These are again participants in the ecosystem who come together to further help the startup. So there's an idea. That idea has got some proof of concept or some market backing or understanding. Now the angel investors, mentors, accelerators, or incubators put in more money in the form of again equity or CCPS instruments or CCD. So these are compulsory convertible preference shares or debentures. The product or service gets launched more rigorously. The advisors need advisory equity. The investors want to enter into investment documents with the company. If there are non-residents, there are FEMA elements attached to the investment. And because there is a valuation or a price discovery happening, there is also a need for the valuation to be undertaken. As professionals, ICI has our own RVO body. So you can also apply as a registered valuer, complete the process there and become a registered valuer to further offer some of these services to the startups. So that's on the piece of contributing to their business again as a one-stop solution. The next stage is the venture capital, and thereafter the private equity stage. These are largely institutional investors, funds, domestic and offshore funds who have an appetite to make high-risk investments in startups of a significant value. Their Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D, these are common things that you will hear are alphabetically E, F, G, H, I, etc. That largely means rounds of capital raised and are only indicative to an extent of where they are in their fundraising journey. It does not otherwise indicate anything specifically. So venture capital, private equity, other rounds of capital. You investors again commonly invest in these compulsory convertible preference shares, CCPS. Dilution in shares or restriction on sale of founder shares happen. So dilution is again a term used in the ecosystem to reflect the fact that the company is giving equity to an incoming shareholder in exchange for capital. And when that equity is given to the incoming shareholder, fresh shares are issued from the company. Therefore, all existing shareholders who have equity in the company, their percentage in the company kind of reduces. So, you put this across in an Excel chart, you could say Ishank has 100 shares in the company, equivalent to 10%. Let's say there are totally 1,000 shares, and a new investor comes in and he's issued 200 shares. Then the total number of shares in the company become 1,200, and Ishank gets 100 upon 1,200 now. So his percentage in the company has reduced, which is called dilution. So there is dilution. Founders tend to also enjoy some liquidity for the time and effort they've been putting in the past, the limitations in terms of compensation that they may have drawn or the compensations they may have forgone. So they enjoy some level of liquidity in order to further continue growing the business. So that's Series B, A, B, and the private equity stages usually also see some of the employee stock options. So employees who had been giving stock options exercise their stock and realize liquidity against their investment. So these things also work towards the business maturing, more people participating, revenue growing, overseas business expansions happening. All of these again are areas where professional help is needed for by startups. And being someone who has participated in this journey from the beginning would be the person that they would want to trust and speak to. So that's on the private equity side. And lastly, the exit, or I would say the waterfall event. Right. So here's the stage where either the startup is acquired, startup goes in for an IPO, or the startup has got an opportunity where it can swap shares for its shares in exchange for shares of another company, again just via a scheme of merger itself. So those are the ways in which the business eventually turns out to either continue or to migrate or merge itself into another institution or business. And then again at this stage, see events in the form of liquidity to shareholders, liquidity to founders, liquidity to employees, all of whom then set up their own family planning or succession vehicles as well in order to further continue their business aspirations, or for the matter of succession planning. So these, again, as setting up private trusts, become opportunities for us as professionals to get involved in. This entire stage, from incorporation to exit, can be a timeline between 5, 7, 8, 9, or 10 years, right? A Zomato kind of company, 2009, 10 incorporated, 2020, 21 IPO. It's a 10-year IPO story. A company like White Hat Junior and a Baiju, acquiring them is a 4-year story. Typical stories are between 2 to 8 years by the time this entire incorporation, friends, family, incubator, venture capital, private equity has happened, and there's been an exit. So in a span of 2 to 5 years, you are able to participate in the journey for this company, offer a whole host of professional services, work with a set of professionals as well, and therefore be participate, therefore be a part of this entire journey for the startup. This just to again make it more pointed in terms of what we can do at each stage. So the recognition happened. We talk about helping startups getting DPIT, getting angel tax, getting ATIC. There are a whole host of policy programs across states. While we don't have the liberty to discuss each state's policy, I would request you to go to the specific states' websites, or maybe just Google search their websites for their specific states' startup policies or programs, and those are over and above all of these benefits. So just for example, Maharashtra has a fintech policy that gives 10 lakh rupees worth credit in the bank of the startup for some of the expenses and some of the taxes that startups do pay in the state of Maharashtra. So if you are a fintech in startup in the state of Maharashtra, there's a verification process. You fulfill that, complete it, giving them the requisite docs, they're giving you 10 lakh rupees in the bank. So that's a policy for Maharashtra. I'm sure there are policies across states that are doing things for startups, subsidizing costs for them. And we'll have to look at it from a state by state perspective and help those startups out in those states. The second is the due diligence, the transaction support piece. So due diligence, valuation, structuring, regulatory, FEMA, company law. They needed all of this help because they're raising capital from investors. Our house needs to be in order, or if you're working with investors, we are working with them to help the startup get a lot of things in order and also provide information so as to understand that the financial and legal structure of the company is found enough to receive a good amount of investment and grow further, and that there are no red flags, more particularly in the business operation model or any aspects of the business. Third is on ESOPs, a big need for there to help them set up ESOP plans, structures, and reward mechanism. Fourth is financial planning or treasury management. Very important. Startups get a lot of capital, but are unable to decide how to appropriately plan the use of capital, how to treasury manage the money so as to earn basic returns from it. So it's an important aspect that they can capture. Availability of resources is also something that is relevant to them, which is in the form of getting grants and subsidies by the government, which is what I mentioned. Getting post investment support in the form of MIS, tax, and regulatory help is also something that is relevant and needed for startups. So they're doing a lot of work in terms of they need a lot of help and support in terms of getting that MIS tax and financial support going in the form of an outsourced accounting or a cloud CFO angle to it. And lastly, the integrated professional approach, I think, that is working with lawyers, company secretaries, actuaries, and other professionals to mainly make this a one-stop sort of solution for the startup, because eventually they want to interact with people who have been part of their journey and who understand how it is to work with some of these companies. And by companies today, startups are referred to as new economic group. So NEG, when you approach a finance institution like a bank or some of these funds, they look at startups as NEGs, new economic groups, or as companies that have a different economic relevance today. So yeah, this is an appendix for various references that you would like to put together, and if there's anything specific in terms of sections or references that you would like to read, then that would be useful. These are the state-sponsored websites. I've just populated them together. That some of these websites have the programs specific to those states. This is my information, contact information, in case I'm happy to help any of you for your professional pursuits. Then I would be happy to contribute and help us as professionals, each other, and more importantly, our clients, to get them to do business as easily as we would want them to do. So yeah, that's the entire perspective on the Startup India trilogy. I also have another deck which I wanted to just run by, and that is largely with respect to some of the investment instruments that startups use, because it is something that goes hand in hand with raising capital and with understanding companies. But before that, would like to use at least the next 15-20 minutes, if we have that, to, I know we have a 2-hour window, but I feel that I wanted to concisely share things in the first 60 odd minutes, hear more questions, answer them out, and then maybe I have another 10 minutes in terms of some of these investment instruments that I just wanted to share, because they are somewhere linked to working with startups who are obviously today raising capital plus doing business. So I think before I just go to that, if there are questions that we have, then we would want to take those first, and then we'll spend some more time on other aspects. So Dr. Sambit, do we have questions? Hello.
Yeah, sir.
Yes, sir.
1 minute.
Okay.
We have already registered our one of the client in this startup. We received DPIIT recognition certificate in the month of July 2021. Thereafter, we have filed application under section 56 to get the benefit for the angel tax, but application is still under process. What to do to proceed the application and how to get the grievance on the portal for the subject?
All right. So I understand that there is an application done, but you're not getting a response from them. And you have applied in July. So by now you should have got it, but since there is a delay in or not having got it yet, couple of things that you can do. The ID on the right that you see here, dipb-startups@nic.in. Please write to this email ID or on this number. Both are responsive. Please please write on the email, this is the application you've made, so and so is the date, so and so is your number. So just to give them a background, and that you have applied but are awaiting the the angel tax exemption being granted. You've not received an email from the government department. So I think that should do. Just out of recent experience, while the pace in between was quick, there has been a little bit of a slowdown in terms of the recent applications, maybe July, August, September at their end. So I think that's just a process that is finishing. But nevertheless, please do write to this email ID or contact this number. Both are very responsive, and you should get some solution in terms of your application being completed, or if they need some additional information, then the same be offered from our end. So I think that's what we can do best to solve this problem of yours.
It is very illogical on the part of income tax that through a registered partnership form is eligible for recognition, but 80 IAC doesn't give benefit to the firm.
Yeah. Yes. So I think our friend has picked up the detail at a very sharp level, and I can only praise our professionals being able to do that even on a webinar. So that's absolutely right, sir. The way in which the regulation is as of today is that the 80 IAC benefit is available only to a limited liability partnership or a private limited company. Unfortunately, they did not write or they did not include partnership firms to be given the same benefit. Now, there was really no logic to this per se. Not that even the sections had any memorandum in terms of what was the intent of the legislature to exclude firms. But that's the funny way in which the regulations have been drafted, and therefore the firms do not have the 80 IC benefit. Only LLPs and private limited companies do. So I hear the pain, but that's where the advice that if you're again a company that is looking to get such a benefit, then we should not really be chasing and not setting up a firm structure. We should be under LLP or a private limited because we know the benefits of being there. One more point in terms of an FAQ, that what kind of companies get the 80 ISC benefit. So the track record of companies that have
NRI and venture capitalists invest in startup, then the capital is exempted from taxation under which section?
It is exempted under section 56(2)(7)(b) of the Income Tax Act. Here is the section. The section in terms of exemption is as follows: that if there is any person who raises capital who is a resident, then the provisions of 56 apply. So because the person is non-resident, 56(2)(7)(b) didn't apply. Further, there's a proviso to section 56(2)(7)(b) that says that the provisions of 56(2)(7)(b) do not apply to category 1 to AI, so SEBI registered alternate investment funds. So 56 as a section, 56(2)(7)(b) as provisos that provide the exemptions that these sections do not apply to investments itself, and therefore do not apply to companies, and therefore not to startups.
Can the eligible business cover research and development company carrying out research?
Yes, there's no problem. There is no limitation on any form of purpose of company that can get the benefit. So a company that is doing research and development can be an eligible startup and have the benefits of DPIIT recognition, not older than 10 years, not 100 crores in turnover, and you should have something that is innovative or something that is scalable in terms of generating employment and wealth, which you can articulate in a more qualitative manner. The first two are quantitative, and an R&D should not be an issue in terms of a business objective.
Which are the benefits available to the eligible startups other than angel tax exemption and 80 IAC benefit?
So the other benefits were, sir, here, Companies Act, all of them that are here. I think don't want to spend time again, but Companies Act, a whole set of benefits, foreign exchange, which is FEMA regulations, third, labor environmental laws, fourth, IBC, SEBI, RBI, fifth, intellectual property, public procurement, undedicated income tax, obviously, which already covered, but you're saying beyond that, and some startup cells that give you a more attention-oriented approach. So all of these are above and over the income tax benefits. The serial numbers 1 to 6.
Do you have to register our startup first in startupindia.com, then in state startup ecosystem to avail the state benefits?
You have to first register yourself on startupindia.gov.in. Yes, there is no other second registration platform as such. This is the single platform itself. Once you're registered under Startup India as a recognized startup, then the same portal where you will log in has options for getting angel tax and for getting 80 IAC. They're part of that same interface. You will be able to visualize and pick up from there. So no other registration to be done. The only one is startupindia.gov.in.
You have been, that one is, sir, you are concentrating on that corporate entity. Can you, that one is point out something about the partnership form also?
Sorry, I didn't get it.
One person has told that you are concentrating on the corporate entity. Can you just point out something about that one is partnership form?
Okay. So for partnership firm, for partnership firm, the understanding is, firstly, can you become an eligible startup? Yes, no problem. So will you get IPR benefits? Yes. Will you get government tender preferences? Yes. Right. Would you get IBC related benefits in terms of winding up a dissolution? Yes. Right. So I think those things which firms can get, you will get. But for example, something like an 80 IAC, we're not getting. So we will have to forego. Something in the form of capital gains benefits. There is no capital gain when you're in a partnership firm. Right? You have a share of profit in the firm. There are no shares. So there are some things by virtue of structure that don't come to a firm. Those you don't get. But otherwise, as a business, you will be a startup, enjoy all benefits of a startup that you want to enjoy, and which are permissible by virtue of the private firm, registered firm structure. And you have a tax rate which is 30% plus surcharge and cess. And largely, like I said, that it may not be suitable for an investment solicitation. But let's leave that aside. There are a whole host of other benefits. So like I said, Companies Act would not apply because you're a firm. Foreign exchange, again, to the extent it applies to you, yes. Labor environmental laws, yes, for firms. Public procurement, yes, for firms. IPR, yes, for firms. Even tax, wherever applicable, yes. Most probably these don't apply to you because you don't have capital gains or angel tax or 80 IAC, because these are equity related. And the 80 IAC is the carve out due to legislative, the main legislature is. So yeah, that's, I think, to summarize, very focused to what firms or LLPs can get.
What are the practical reasons for so less number of angel tax exemptions, startups, and even further lesser number for 80 IAC eligible startup?
Yeah, I think the foremost reason is education gap and just low level of awareness. That's the foremost reason. that companies have not, or the fact that is there a cost involved, or are there benefits of doing it? These are all parts of education and awareness issues. I believe that's the foremost gap where which we as professionals first of all can fill, and which startups can enjoy and take benefits of. And the second piece, which is why in the interministerial board law, see there it's a logical trade-off between a loss to the revenue exchequer, in the sense that no tax will be paid, and therefore if they keep giving thousands of startups the chance to not pay taxes on profits, right? Kind of needs to be balanced with the revenue exchequers need to get money to run the country as well, right? So that's the third one is a complete trade-off. I would say there might not be a logic beyond that. The first two are absolutely free, and some things that can simply be filled by a gap of awareness and education. And that today till now it's been ignored by a lot of these companies because they didn't know about it.
Does a BPO unit propose to offer finance, tax, transaction and accounting services to Indian and foreign clients eligible to be recognized as startup?
Yes, you can be recognized. The question is a BPO unit. So I'm a BPO unit. I'm not doing anything new. Will I be recognized as a startup? Maybe that's just the perception you have. So again, the criteria: 10 years, 100 crores, and the third one being that being a BPO unit, doing accounting outsourcing work, you would definitely be able to engage, employ people, and ultimately create wealth as well. So if you're a unit that's doing this, can you get startup recognition? Answer is yes. I'm assuming you are not some subsidiary, you're not some corporate reorganization spin-off. You're right. You are someone who wants to set up a business of account outsourcing, and you feel there is an opportunity to grow, being a startup in that segment and space. And can you be eligible? Yes, yes, and yes.
Does the first valuation report for private placement, raising fund through non-convertible preference shares, affect the report of due diligence at a later stage?
Raising capital by way of non-convertible preference shares.
Yeah.
Non-convertible preference shares. So again, a technicality lies in whether they are, I'm assuming they would be redeemable, and therefore this would primarily be debt because they're not convertible to equity. So what are they? They're going to just become debt on the company with an obligation of repayment, right? So if that's the commercial construct, then the follow-on question being that whether it will impact the diligence of the company, I don't think so. That will be an issue, but that it sits as debt on the company is certainly subject matter that gets attention, and therefore the treatment of debt will be something that will get discussed in your DD stage, right? An investor, let's say, would not want to give 2 crores out of which 50 lakhs is towards repaying debt. Then his money is not really getting used in the business. He would ask the debt holder to stay put on the debt and kind of have his right of repayment at some point of time in future. The issue is a trade-off again, that you have debt in the company, but it's not a major issue. But yeah, you don't become too quick to return the debt and have the investor capital utilized in paying off debts. That may not be wise for the business at early stages.
Please guide for debt funding of startups of any scheme of banks. Have you got it, sir?
Yeah. The question was on debt funding or some scheme by banks for startups. So SIDBI, Small Industries Development Bank of India, SIDBI, has a fund of funds, and as a portal as well that you can visit online, which is in the business of granting some sort of venture debt, I would say, or equity or collateral backed debt to early companies. And I think that's the best way to approach getting debt funds for banks or from financial institutions. It's not that too many regular banks or private banks, have schemes that give unsecured debt to startups. that's not really there. Your SIDBI does a good process of giving you venture debt, and with a couple of other PSU banks. So I think that's the best bet on getting unsecured debt from financial institutions.
What will be the tax effect if the company issues preference shares at a premium?
What will be the tax effect if company issues preference shares at premium? So tax impact is, I would say, none. As long as you are able to justify the premium, which is what the law requires you to do. And the justification of premium is via providing for a valuation report from a merchant banker under the discounted cash flow method. This is what section 56 to 7B says. And you have to read this with rule 11U, 11UA, 11UA sub rule 2. That's the more technical reference to the regulations. But there is no tax impact as long as you're able to justify the premium. To give you that additional cushion, if you have the angel tax exemption, then you have all the more stronger case to make that the issue of shares at preference shares at premium have no tax issues on the company. If you fail to do any of these, if you're unable to justify the premium, don't have a discounted cash flow report from a merchant banker, don't have the angel tax exemption, then the government has a good case to tax that premium as income, and that's going to be taxed at 30% plus surcharge cess and followed up with other assessment formalities and penalties and proceedings. So if you don't take the right steps at the beginning, you have some difficult things ahead for you, and that's when tax will get triggered. Otherwise, you will not have any tax issues.
So this much of questions, you can take up the next part.
Okay, sir. So I'll just stop share for a minute.
Yeah.
Yes, just give me 1 minute. Just 1 minute. Yeah, is this screen visible?
Yeah.
Okay. So I wanted to just while our trilogy is the first half and the entire discussion that we had till now, there is an element that is linked to this, though it is a separate topic in itself, but nevertheless something that at least is a touch point for you to start working on. Because startups tend to raise capital and therefore professionals are also involved in that stage, wanted to share a few things that startups are doing and how some of these benefits are helping these companies in raising capital as well, because they're interrelated. So there was and therefore there were a couple of questions on preference shares, taxation of preference shares, and what will these do. So startups are raising capital via the instrument compulsory convertible preference shares. These are instruments that give preference to the startups in terms of, they give preference to the investors in terms of getting those preferred rights. We spoke about the fact that investors would want to have contractual rights when they invest in the company. So they have preferential rights by virtue of those contracts, which are built into these investment instruments. Preference at the time of liquidation of the company should things not go out that well. Preference in the form of dividend as well. So that's the instrument compulsory convertible preference shares. Under the Companies Act, these are allowed to be issued by the startups. They have to be converted over a period of 20 years max. That's the outer time limit. They can be issued via rights issues or private placement. From a tax perspective, it is necessary to obtain a report from a merchant banker. You will get the entire holding period benefit right from the time the stock is held, and eventually even if the stock is converted. And it is permissible to be raised even from a non-resident. So you also have foreign investors or institutions that invest in Indian companies as compulsorily convertible preference shares. So that's the instrument that is predominantly used in the company. And in order to reflect that premium in the angel tax bit, I'll just request attention to this small table on the right. So let's say the company was valued at 10 crore and there were 1 lakh shares in the company. The price per share becomes 10,000, 1,000, and the face value of shares is 10. The 990 becomes the premium. This 990 into the number of shares that get issued eventually to the investor is what was the premium that was subject matter of taxation. And hence one of our participants asked the question, what would be the tax treatment for this 990, which we said there's no tax as long as we keep checks and balances. So that's how the premium is getting computed vis-a-vis the value of the company. The higher the value and the lower the number of shares, the base number of shares, the higher becomes the premium. So you have companies whose shares are valued at 25 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 40 lakhs, 50 lakhs. That doesn't mean that the value is so much. It's just that the number of shares available in the company are low. They have not issued that many number of shares, but the value of the business is high, concentrated with a few people, therefore a high premium or a high price per share, almost like I said, in lakhs and lakhs. So that's where optically things start also making a difference. When somebody sees a share worth 35 lakhs, they tend to question what's this and want to go further, deeper into understanding it. So CCPS one, CCD is the second one, and I'm just not going to spend time, but just to give you an overview, CCDs are usually used by startups in what is called a bridge round of financing. Bridge round is again a term used in the ecosystem between round 1 and round 2. So it's not like it's up to round 2 ask for capital. It's between round 1 and round 2. So it's a bridge round. And they use the CCD as an instrument that converts into an instrument at the next round of valuation. So compulsorily convertible debentures or CCDs is the instrument that is used. The third is in the form of convertible notes. Sorry, I think I missed that. Yeah. And we discussed this in a bit at the beginning, that whether the convertible note being a unique instrument to startups allows for them to either convert the stock or have it repaid, and the period for conversion, the outer limit is 10 years. Is there any tax on issuance of these notes? No, because it is debt with an option to convert. Is there any tax at the time of conversion of the instrument? Again, no. There is a tax provision under 4710 that gives you freedom to convert without tax issues. It is eventually a subsequent sale that the tax will happen, even in the case of a convertible note. Can it be issued to non-residents? Again, yes. And because it's a convertible note, a debt, there is no valuation discovery at the time of issuance. The valuation just gets pushed to some time in the future. So that's our convertible note. There was the question, there's venture debt. There are ESOPs. So these are largely mechanisms to compensate employees. Venture debt is largely mechanisms to provide some form of debt to the startups, but have an equity incentive option as well. Yeah, so that's just something additional that I wanted to share about parts of how DPIT benefits again flow to some of these instruments. The convertible note is what DPIT allows. The CCDs and the CCPS are fairly common, and all the tax protections with these are given under these instruments as well. Non-resident investments are also welcome under these instruments, with again special benefits to convertible note structures. So I think that's the I would say mix between the practical use and the theoretical involvement or use also of the DPIT benefits. Yeah. So, sir, while I know I've finished a little bit early, but I thought keeping it short and useful, hopefully, to the participants would have helped. Again, if there are more questions, so we can take them for the next 5-10 minutes as well. Hello. Dr. Sambit, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So the next part of it also I have just run through. In case we have some more questions there, sir, I can take them. Or else we have done the trilogy piece as well as some more added
questions. I'll just check off right now.
Okay, sir.
So startup funding also, you just take it some 5 to 10 minutes on that part.
Okay. In the funding, in the sense on which piece, sir?
Yes, sir. People are asking for that one is startup funding. You just take it in that one is 3-4 questions has come up in that related to startup funding, so that you just highlight on the startup funding for the 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay. Were there questions on this or just in general? So, while I don't have a deck on this, I will share a bit about the question is on what we can do in terms of funding for startups. Okay. So I think in terms of funding for startups, so the ecosystem right now is active, and the best form of raising capital, and maybe I'll use our existing deck, at least there are some elements in terms of funding. Yeah. So in terms of funding, what's happening right now is there are a lot of angel investors, mentors, accelerators, incubators. They are actively funding companies, and their investment ticket sizes are between 2 to 5 crores. Then you have the venture capital and private equity firms who go upwards of maybe 7, 8, 10 crores, and then all up to 100 crores and upwards in terms of their investment appetite. So these companies are raising capitals from at various stages from some of these investors. In raising capital, founders who have equity in the company give up their equity percentage in exchange for new investors into the company. And when you say the founders give up their equity percentage, they only give up their percentage, not their own shares. So an important technical difference for us as professionals is that if I am a founder and if I have 10,000 shares in the company, which is equivalent to 100%, and if a new participant and investor joins the business, he gets 200 shares in the business, then he gets 200 shares issued by the company in exchange for money, which means my percentage reduces. It is not that my 1,000 shares which I own, out of which I give him 200 and I'm left with 800, because that becomes a taxable event in the form of a transfer of shares by me, the founder. That's not how funding happens. Funding happens by way of issuance of new shares from the company, percentage of existing people reducing, and money coming to the company. If it's a transaction between you and me as shareholders, then that's where my percentage goes direct. My shares come directly to you, and that's an other way, which is called a secondary transfer or a secondary purchase. And what is coming into the company is called primary investment or primary purchase. So funding also has two parts and have to be understood technically different. Investment into the company for new shares issued by the company, or purchase of shares by one investor from an existing shareholder of the company. In case no money goes to the company, money exchanges hands, and therefore shares exchange hands. In such cases, the number of shares in the company remains same, only percentage changes between the two parties. It does not change the overall scheme. When new shares are issued, the overall percentages in the company change. So that way, understanding funding from a primary, secondary perspective is important for us. Stages of funding is important for us. Things to do at each stage of capital raise important to understand, participate, do the best that we can for that particular founder of the company as a professional. And I think for valuation, etc., you also have common databases in the form of Tracxn, TRACXN. I'll put it here in the, okay, the chat is disabled. There is a platform called TRACXN, Tracxn, that has a lot of database for startups, venture intelligence, second one, public platforms like Your Story or an INC 42 that write about startups, publish stories about startups or publish news about startups raising capital. So that's the whole piece around funding. And then the question about why are startups so highly valued remains I would say something that we can go on discussing about. But lastly, there is a trade-off between raising money and equity exchanged. Again, that results in valuation. Just for example, if I want 5 crores of capital, and I'm willing to give up 10% of my company in exchange for 5 crores, then the value of my company is 50 crores. This is just basic math, which is if 5% is equivalent to 10 crore, then 5 crores is equivalent to 10%, then how much is equivalent to 100%, which is 50 crores. 50 crores ka 10% is 5 crores. So that's why valuation is 50 crores. They may not necessarily at an early stage be a very scientific method to valuing startup. It may be a cruder approach of how much equity I'm willing to give up in exchange for how much capital I need. And obviously, I need to know why I need 5 crores. I can't just simply ask for 50 crores at an early stage when I have no business plan or a viable business product tested that's going to work, right? So in early stage, I take small amounts of money, grow the business, and eventually ask for larger capital and give equity in exchange. So that's about funding. If I wanted to just be able to summarize, for the benefit of our participants.
One question is there. To retain the talent, the startup usually goes for ESOP. What could be the right time to bring ESOPs into the picture?
Great. I think the right time to bring in ESOPs is at the third stage. I think the accelerator, investor, incubator, mentor. You see the third one over here is the best stage to bring startups into is to bring ESOPs, into the picture. Have a stock option pool is what it is called, being created, and the pool and identify talent, give them those stock options and have a vesting for them to complete by the time they can exercise the stock options. So I think that's the best phase to start.
So next question is this: should the startup raise the funding directly into the company or create an LLP where small investor invest and LLP in turn invests in the startup? Which method is preferable?
No, thanks for asking this question. The problem statement here, if for the benefit of all the other participants, why this LLP intermediary in between, if that's the logic first, is that if there are 15 investors who are to invest in my company, and let's say they are each willing to give me maybe 10 lakh rupees, for example, or let's say 20 investors are willing to give me 5 lakh rupees each, in which case they all give me 5 lakh and I have 20 shareholders in my company, plus 2 founders, plus let's say 2-3 mentors. I have 25 people in my company at the beginning, just because I took 1 crore rupees. Now, this may be a sort of, not a negative signal, but a baggage to somebody else who's looking at my company for the next round of investment, saying, Kero, you have 30 people in your company already, and how do you really manage the operational mechanics of these 30 people? So therefore, there is a sense from the founder's perspective that I don't want to deal with these 30 people. Kindly set up an entity by yourself where you pool in your capital and give me a single check in the form of investment from the LLP. I only know the investment from LLP as the investment legal entity who has invested in my business. So this is the argument, the problem, and why it's done. Now, whether this is feasible today, just to share, there are SEBI registered angel investment vehicles which are in place. They are angel investment vehicles where they can do what is called deal by deal investing. So they can identify startup A, take money for startup A, pool money only for startup A, give money only to startup A, and you will have only one investor on your cap table. The SEBI vehicle is a permissible vehicle to pool money. When you do this as an LLP, you are practically doing something that's really not permissible under SEBI in terms of pooling investments. Therefore, you carry some regulatory risk. Second, there is a tax disadvantage of the LLP. that the capital gains eventually at exit will come to the LLP. The LLP will pay tax, and you will distribute post-tax profits to partners. Those partners will get share of profit. Therefore, there's no use of that money beyond that for them. If they had got it as capital gain, when they individually held stock, they could use the benefits of capital gain planning. They could purchase residential property, for example, and get benefits under 54F. So you will lose benefits if you consolidate it into the LLP being the intermediary vehicle. Angel fund, SEBI regulated fund is the preferred choice to pool investments. Directly taking 30 people on your startup is not always a problem. It's an optical issue. But if capital was the greater need and you did take money from 30 people, it's fine. Don't feel guilty about it. Get along, and there'll come a time when all of them will sell stock. So I think that's the way to pragmatically evaluate the situation. There are a couple of options. Do try them out. If they don't really work and capital is coming, take a call. You're not going to be disadvantaged too much.
One question is that, sir, how do investors add value to startups?
How do investors add value to startups? No, there is no straight fixed answer to this. They obviously need to connect the company, understand the challenges that it faces as of now. They may have liked the business, liked an idea, liked the founder, but they need to see what problems the business is facing, provide them necessary connects. Money is already what they have provided as a resource, right? So money is given, correct? What can they do beyond money? If that's the question, is to provide connects, provide problem solving capabilities, provide some sort of indication to what the next round of investment can look like and who can contribute there, market access to some geographies or to some segments or to some clients or customers. If they're an investor who has a portfolio of another 30, 40 companies, portfolio company access is usually very useful. So I think investors can do more than just give money. And I think that's where they will add value to the business.
Sir, can a foreign company register under Startup India Hub?
No. It is only for an Indian company, a private limited company registered under the Companies Act 1956 or 2013.
So then one question is that how do you connect to enablers after creating a profile in Startup India Hub?
How do we connect to enablers after creating the profile? So I think you'll have to just see the website around a little more. There are requests to make on the website, and yeah, that's pretty much it. If they're not replying, then maybe those people are nearly not interested. So you keep other channels also open, try on LinkedIn, try on other platforms, try meeting in person now that we are all looking at 90, 100 crore vaccinations. So just go out and do something different. Try what's already working, but I would say just try and see something else that also works.
How do investors earn returns from investing in startups?
How do investors earn returns from investing in startups? So that's largely a function of valuation. If I am an investor who has invested in company A at a 10 crore valuation and I have 5% in the company, here's my entry price. And let's say after 4 years, my company does or is doing very well, has raised rounds of capital, is now valued at, for example, 150 crores. And if I have, for example, 3% in the company, then I have 150 crore ka 3%, which is 4.5 crores. And, maybe I had put in 1 crore before for 10% in the company. So 1 has become 4.5, 10% has become 5%. Is just arbitrary math. The objective is that my percentage in the company multiplied by value of the company is what is my worth in the future. Somebody will buy these shares from me as a secondary transfer. We discussed about primary and secondary. And when I get that money, I would have got 4 crores, for example, against my 1 crore investment. So that is how eventually an investor looks to make money by selling his stock to somebody else who will buy it in a secondary purchase.
What is the time frame for obtaining certificate of recognition as a startup in the case of an entity already exists?
15 days, 15 to 20 days. Complete this process that you see here, and after this process being completed, you will get it in approximately 15 days.
An entity is yet to be registered or incorporated. Can I visit the Startup India portal and mobile application to register or incorporate my entity as either a private limited company or registered partnership firm or a limited liability partnership?
No, you have to first register your company with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, the MCA, as an LLP or a private limited company. So that is separate. That has nothing to do with Startup India website. So the MCA has its process, and you incorporate a company. Once you've incorporated the company, you can come to the website and take things forward. You cannot come to this website and try to set up your company. No, that's done separately by the MCA on their separate website.
What are the aspects that need to be reviewed before issuing support to the startups?
What are the aspects that have to be reviewed before providing support to startups?
Yeah.
This is just general, but I think you would want to know a bit about the business, about the founder, about the support, and in what function or domain is that support needed. So if I'm as we are all professionals, chartered accountants, I would say that I would provide support in the domain of finance or tax or regulatory or law, right? So I think those would be my domain areas of providing support, and they might be subject matter domain experts. So these are some of the things you may want to evaluate, where you will also be able to help and provide support to them, and just to know a bit about the business, know a bit about the founder, so that you are dealing with the right people. So I think that's just what you can do.
Is it risky to invest in innovative companies with high potential?
Yes,
what are the risks?
Yeah, it is risky. Startup as an alternative investment asset class is the highest risk asset class that you can get in investments. Venture capital, private equity is also a high risk asset class. So yes, it is risky. What is your risk? Your risk is that your investment will become zero, absolute zero. So if you've invested 10 lakhs, 20 lakhs, 50 lakhs, 1 crore, you will get zero, nothing out of it. Because these are private limited companies, they are legally protected in the sense that a company is limited by its liability, and therefore it has no further liability to any shareholders. So unless there is anything left in the company for you to get, you can get zero out of your investment. So that's the risk that you carry, and it is a high risk asset class for investment. So you should balance your risk along with this asset class and other asset classes. But it's an interesting function to invest in startups.
How are the pre-money and post-money valuation calculated? How can I calculate what percentage of the company I would get by investing?
Ooh.
Have you got it, sir?
Yeah. So you see, the question is pre-money, investment, post-money percentage calculation. So you will have to take a base case scenario. Let's say your business is valued at pre-money valuation of 9 crores. So you please see this column seed round. Just see this first column. Investment amount is 1 crore. So pre-money plus investment is equal to post-money. That's how it is. Pre-money plus investment is equal to post-money. Pre-money 9, investment 1, post-money 10. The pre-money number of shares is 90,000, just academic example. So your price per share is 1,000. Number of shares you will issue is 1 crore divided by 1,000. And then you will have the price per share post investment. So pre and post always remain the same. Pre-money plus investment is equal to post money. The second part of your question was, how do I determine how much percentage I hold in the company? So let's say in our example, 8,000 and plus 1,000, this 90,000 were the founder shares. He held 100% of the company. There was an investor who held 10% in the company, therefore 10,000 shares. When new shares get issued, like how we were discussing before, the new shares increase the total number of shares from 1 lakh to 1 lakh 17. The percentage reduces from 89 to 75. So that is how the percentage calculation works in the company. Pre-money, investment, and post-money are the determinants to discovering the price per share, and then the percentage holding changes accordingly.
Why the shareholder agreement is important to an investor?
Why is the shareholders agreement important to investors? It is important to investors because the shareholding agreements have clauses with respect to protection of investors' rights. So they have clauses which deal with protecting their rights in the event things don't work out well, or in the event of having some sort of beneficial relationship with the company, because they have also contributed capital to the company, and also have governing mechanisms to participate in decision-making process of the company, again because they're investors. So therefore, all of these things are documented in the shareholders agreement, and it is important for that, and therefore it is an important document for the investors, because all of this is written there, and it is an agreement signed between the company and the founder and the investors. Those rights in the agreement also become part of the articles of association of the company, and therefore they are important in that sense, so that the investor is able to protect his investment in a manner that would be rightful of the money he has invested.
Sir, what is a syndication? What is a syndication agreement, and why is it used?
Sorry, the last part is why? Why isn't it used?
Okay.
Dr. Sambit, what was the last part? Why is it not used? Is that the question?
Why it is used?
Why it is used? Syndication is a terminology used to pool money. That LLP example, which one of our participants asked, means syndication. Syndication means to come together, to what is also called stitching, STITCHING, stitching an investment round. So what we do, what we in sense founders usually do is, let's say I want to raise a total of $2 million, 15 crores, for example. I may approach Mr. A and tell them that I'm raising 2 crores. How much are you willing to invest out of this entire amount? He says, I can invest $500,000, not more. So let's say invest 3.5 crores out of the 15 crores. Now, because I have a commitment from Mr. A, I go to Mr. B and C and tell them, here, see, I have somebody who's giving me $500,000. Would you give me 750 each, or let's say 500 each? And they'll be happy to match and come along with Mr. A, who's already committed to me. So that's called syndication, where people come together and invest in my business. Well, largely because one person may not have the appetite to put the entire money that I'm looking for, but 2 or 3 people put together can certainly help do that. So that's how syndication works practically, and what syndication means. And syndication agreement would just document all of this.
Why are innovative companies' valuations are so high? How are they calculated?
That's a whole different discussion. It's just that they're commercially negotiated, and investors see value in the business in the long term, looking at 3, 5, 7, 10-year horizons, almost 7 to 10-year horizons also, and so they feel long-term value is substantially higher than what it is now, and they're willing to be a part of this business.
Is there any kind of tax incentive when investing in innovative companies with high potential?
No specific tax incentive. You have that one capital gains benefit we spoke of in one of those sections. So if you have capital gains arising from the sale of shares of a residential property, and if you that invest that into the startup, then you have a tax benefit. Otherwise, there is no incentive of investing.
Okay. Any process, last question, any process to obtain profitability of this startup? Is there any process to obtain the profitability of startups?
No, there is no process to obtain profitability. I think it's business that has to drive process. Founder has to drive it. There is no other process to get profitability.
Okay. So just summarize within 2 minutes.
Okay, no, thank you. I think I would like to just share that there is ample opportunity for chartered accountants to engage with startups. I also understand sometimes commercials or fee is a subject matter of discussion, and what is the potential for some of these companies to pay a fair fee for the kind of work that we do, and which is justifiable to the relationship that two people have. I would like to just say that take it up as one chance. Give yourself a shot against another company that has a desire to do well. Find out a balance that compensates your professional work as well as the fee element that you may be otherwise thinking about. But find a way to work with them, engage with them. On the long term, you are going to be on the gaining side, either financially or academically or knowledge wise or experience wise. So you'll always be at the plus. And the sooner you start this, the better it is. Then you tend to engage with more finer or more mature startups where the balances are even better. Then there is no question of a trade-off otherwise. So opportunities are there. Education for some of these guys is needed. A lot of them are technical founders, people who have a background in technology or in science. They have no clue about tax, finance, and you're going to be their guy right from the beginning. So I think there is lots to do and gaps to fill, and we should not leave any stone unturned to offer what we can do best for this new economic group.
On behalf of the Committee on MSME and Startup, I give a really thanks to our today's speaker, Siesang Emsa, who spent his busiest time just to get it that one as his knowledge to forefront. Today we had the opportunity to hear his thoughts, and this is definitely encouraging us in our future endeavor. Your thoughts have enlightened our minds and shown us a new path. Thanks to our speaker, Siesang Emsa, for running the occasion and sharing his opinions on today. Thank you, sir. Thanks to all the viewers of this webinar. Thank you to all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.